All right, let's jump right in. We're about to explore a really fascinating and honestly a pretty audacious theological argument. It's this idea that Jesus didn't just show up with a spiritual message, but that he actually kicked off a multi-millennia, boots-on-the-ground peace plan for the entire planet.
But before we can even get to that, we have to tackle an older, much bigger question. You see, the Torah is just packed with these incredible, epic divine promises. We're talking peace, security, prosperity. So you have to wonder, after all this time, did God actually keep them? Let's, you and I, conduct a little audit.
So here's how we're going to do it. We'll start with that divine audit, and we'll look at two very different sets of promises, a sort of unfulfilled ledger and a fulfilled one. Then we'll see how Jesus is presented as the catalyst that connects them, and we're going to wrap it all up with this really powerful analogy for where all of human history might be heading. Okay, first up, the audit itself. And you know, like any good audit, it means we have to get into the weeds. We have to read the fine print, the original terms and conditions of these ancient divine contracts. And right away, you see this fundamental split in how these promises were made. On one side, you've got the conditional promises. They're your classic if-then statements. If you do your part, then God does his. Simple. But on the other side, you get these incredibly powerful unconditional promises, where the guarantee is all on God's side. It's an I will no matter what. And believe me, that distinction is everything.
So let's open up our first ledger and see how this plays out. We're going to look at the massive promises from the Sinai covenant. And yeah, this is where things start to look a little grim for the divine balance sheet.
Just look at this list. Permanent peace, absolute security, getting the full promised land. According to this audit of the source texts, every single one gets stamped unfulfilled. And the reason is always the same. They were conditional. The main condition, perfect continuous obedience, well, it was never actually met by the people. The if part of the deal was broken.
So here's the kicker. If you were to grade these promises on what our sources call a conditionality index, they score a big, fat 0. They were 100% dependent on human action. There was no divine override if people failed to hold up their end of the bargain.
But wait, that is absolutely not the whole story. Let's pivot now to the second ledger, the promises that were made to Abraham. And these, well, they were structured very, very differently.
Now this is a totally different picture. Promises like a blessing for all nations, kings coming from Abraham's line, and the literal survival of Israel. These are all marked fulfilled. So why the change? Well, because they were way less conditional. And from a Christian theological viewpoint, the fulfillment is seen as happening directly through the person and the global influence of Jesus.
So what does this blessing to all nations actually look like in the real world? It's not just some vague spiritual idea. The source is interpreted as a tangible global civilizational shift. Things like the spread of ethical monotheism, a worldwide moral shift toward compassion, the growth of human rights, and the expansion of the whole love your neighbor ethic. The analysis basically suggests that these global humanitarian norms, they have some strong Christian DNA.
And in stark contrast to that 0 we just saw, the promise of Israel's survival scores a whopping 90% on the unconditionality index. It was a near absolute guarantee, resting completely on God's faithfulness, not on human performance.
Okay, so now we have these two ledgers, right? One is full of broken, conditional promises, and the other is full of fulfilled, unconditional ones. The whole core of this argument is about how these two things connect. And this is really the key question, isn't it? How do you reconcile a book of unfulfilled promises of peace with another book of fulfilled promises that are supposed to bless the whole world? What in the world bridges that gap?
Well, the answer this framework proposes is the idea of a catalyst. So in this view, Jesus isn't some kind of magic wand who just instantly fixes everything. Instead, he's seen as an agent who kicks off a slow, long-term process of change, one that unfolds over millennia.
And here it is, the 2,000-year plan, laid out in 3 steps. Step 1, Jesus initiates a global ethical shift. Step 2, over centuries, humanity slowly, often painfully, starts to transform and learn how to actually meet those original conditions for peace. And that leads to the final step, the fulfillment of those old conditional Sinai promises. Not because the rules were waived, but because the conditions were finally met through this catalyzed process. And this isn't just an abstract idea. The source material points to the really surprising global reach of Jesus' authority today. I mean, when you combine Christians with Muslims who see Jesus as a major figure and other Jesus-positive systems, you get somewhere between 55 to 65% of all humanity acknowledging him in some kind of supreme role. That really adds some weight to this idea of a genuine worldwide shift.
Now, this is crucial. This plan isn't seen as happening in some kind of spiritual vacuum. It's understood as a synergistic process, meaning it works with other major historical forces. Things like technology, secularism, interfaith dialogue, they're all seen as contributing to the exact same trajectory.
So what does this messy 2,000-year-long process actually look like? Well, probably the best analogy for it is a vast, incredibly complex global symphony.
And let's be honest, the historical record is messy. It's totally contradictory, and the source material fully acknowledges that. On the one hand, Christian influence gets credit for things like abolishing gladiator games and fueling peace movements, but on the other hand, it clearly fueled horrific wars, empire building, and inquisitions. The path has been anything but a straight line.
And this brings us right to that core analogy. If global peace is a symphony, you could say the sheet music was laid down 2,000 years ago. And for centuries, the orchestra members fought with each other, they played off key, they created total chaos. But now, maybe, as communication and technology connect everyone, the symphony is finally starting to harmonize, making that final, peaceful movement seem more and more probable.
So, when you step back and look at it all, how plausible is this whole idea? Well, according to the analysis in the source texts, the probability that this whole premise, this long-term synergistic peace plan, actually aligns with the patterns of observable history is surprisingly strong. We're talking between 60 and 75%. Which leaves us with this one last thought to chew on. If history truly is a symphony, with all of its chaotic and beautiful movements, the biggest question for all of us right now is this. After 2,000 years, is humanity finally learning how to play in tune?